mindful that time is short.
We're in public now, Chair.
Okay, members, we are now in public session. You are very welcome to this meeting of the Education Committee. Agenda item 1 is apologies. Apologies have been received from Robin Newton. Are there any other apologies? No? Okay. Agenda item 2, matters arising. Several updates have been received prior to the briefing with the Minister. Tabling of committee amendments for Integrated Education Bill. The deadline for amendments for the Integrated Education Bill is the 12th of January, and the consideration stage of the bill will take place on the 18th of January. Accordingly, it would be my intention to table the committee's agreed amendments today, just for information. Do you need to say anything else on that, Clerk?
No, Chair.
Okay.
That's just good practice, yeah.
Thank you. Agenda item 2.2 is the Period Products Free Provision Bill. We have received a media request from the research received yesterday. Are you content that we share this when the researcher is content to do so? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. 2.3 is the Education Curriculum Minimum Content Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2022 CPR and AED. Members, tabled today is a letter from the Department proposing a regulation which would have permissive rather than mandatory effect, but otherwise achieve the aim of the Education Curriculum CPR and AED Bill. If members are content, the Clerk will liaise with the Examiner for Statutory Rules, Colin McGrath, the bill sponsor, and DE officials in relation to next steps. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Members, there's also a letter from the Minister to principals was received this morning, and it is tabled at page 12 for your information. That's in tabled papers?
Chair, yes.
Page 12?
Yes, Chair.
What time was that received at, Clerk?
8:46, Chair.
Today?
Yeah.
Okay. So is that a new tabled pack then from yesterday? Yeah.
Yeah, just to keep you fully up to date.
Okay. I'll maybe just give members a moment to try and download that new table pack if they haven't already been able to do so, which I haven't. So I'm just gonna go into that now.
The letter thanks all principals for their outstanding work and that of their
That's okay. I think it's actually page 8, Clark, potentially. Yeah.
I beg your pardon, sir. Yeah.
Okay. And so that is issuing to principals today then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I think
yeah, I'm just having a glance at it here as it was received at 9 o'clock. See if what content. I presume the Minister will speak to us as well. So, okay. Okay, then that's all our matters arising, Clark. Yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, then agenda item 3, members, is our oral briefing from the Minister of Education on COVID-19 safety in schools and staff shortages. Can I refer members to correspondence from a young person with long COVID at page 5, a written statement on Fair Start issued yesterday, a cover letter and draft regulations tabled today, which would achieve the same end as the Education Curriculum CPR and AED Bill without primary legislation, and refer you to the letter that we received this morning, and give a warm welcome to Minister of Education Michelle McIlveen MLA, Mark Brown, the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Education, John Smith, the Deputy Secretary, Ricky Irwin, the Director of Inclusion, Alison Chambers, the Director of Promoting Collaboration, Suzanne Kingan, the Director of Curriculum. You're all very welcome, folks. Can I invite the Minister to give us a short briefing and in turn take questions from the members? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to attend this morning, particularly on a constituency day, and I appreciate that you've had a busy committee week. I want to begin by acknowledging the tremendous job done by the education sector in keeping our educational settings open and safe throughout the pandemic. I recognise that Omicron is taking us into a new phase of the pandemic, and we need to remain vigilant, and the Executive's priority remains keeping our children and young people in school. I will therefore continue to work with all concerned to keep our schools open and safe. You'll be aware that there is a high number of COVID cases in the community and in schools, and the advice from the Department of Health is that case rates in schools reflect the prevalence in the wider community. Transmission is occurring both in the community and in schools. There's also much that is not yet known about the potential impact that the Omicron variant may have both in society and schools. We all await further scientific conclusions before being drawn as to how it may change the current picture. My department will be able to respond as required if the need to do so arises. The Public Health Authority publishes detailed weekly statistics on the cases found in schools as part of its bulletin. The most recent bulletin covers statistics for the 4 weeks up to the 12th of December. In broad terms, it's clear that among a largely unvaccinated school-age population, there are currently a high number of cases. The PHA report references that in the 7 days up to the 12th of December, there were 3,405 cases in schools, including staff and pupils. While still high, this figure has fallen in each of the last 3 weeks. There were 505 fewer positive cases amongst pupils and staff in schools last week than there were in the week ending the 21st of November. The impact of COVID on pupil attendance levels is seen in 2 forms: the numbers of sessions missed due to either being a positive case or symptomatic, and the number of sessions missed due to pupils self-isolating as close contacts. The PHA approach to identifying close contacts remains that they will be mostly household close contacts. Proportion of recorded half-day sessions missed due to being either positive or symptomatic in the week ending 10th of December was 1.9%. This compares to the average for this academic year of 1.5%. For pupils self-isolating in the week ending the 10th of December, 0.9% of recorded half-day pupil sessions were missed. This is the same as the missed average for this reason since the start of the academic year. As I referenced earlier, it is too early to understand how the Omicron variant may impact society as a whole and in educational settings. There have been no recommendations from the Department of Health that there should be any change in the department's COVID guidance. While there has been some tightening of restrictions in England, the level of mitigations that have been recently introduced there are not yet at the level that have been maintained throughout this term in Northern Ireland. For example, post-primary pupils in Northern Ireland have worn face coverings in classrooms throughout this academic year, whereas in England they have only recently been reintroduced when moving around schools and are not required in classrooms. The Executive will always take account of the public health advice in determining the levels of mitigations that are required in educational settings. However, we also understand the need to balance the importance of pupils accessing their education with the need to minimise COVID risks. And I believe at the moment there are a range of mitigations in place that are both proportionate and effective. In terms of the Department's COVID guidance for schools, it has remained aligned with the public health advice that we have received. I'd reiterate that the Department has not been advised at this point by the Department of Health to introduce any additional restrictions or mitigations. The focus has therefore been on encouraging adherence to the current messages, such as the use of LFD testing programme for staff in post-primary schools. In terms of how schools apply mitigations and guidance in their school, I've been very clear that I want to let school leaders lead. Therefore, my department's guidance has moved away as much as possible from telling schools what they must or cannot do. Within a framework of supporting school leaders to put in place mitigations that suit their own school circumstances, there are also a number of executive decisions that apply to schools that aim to mitigate the risk of virus transmissions. Asymptomatic testing programs are now well established for post-primary and special school pupils along with staff in all schools. This helps to identify those who may be unwittingly transmitting the virus without knowing that they have it. It also provides important reassurance to parents and staff. A positive development in recent weeks is the lateral flow device testing programme is that new nasal-only swab tests known as ACON tests are now available in schools. The ACON tests mean that there is no longer a need for pupils and staff to use the more invasive nose and throat swab tests. It's also envisaged that the ACON test kits will help improve uptake levels among staff and pupils. The Department and the Education Authority will continue to promote the importance of this testing programme going forward. In particular, we are encouraging all staff and post-primary pupils to take an LFD test within 24 hours of returning to school in January. It's also recommended that post-primary pupils wear a face covering in classes, corridors and communal spaces. And there's also a range of guidance in terms of encouraging social distancing where possible, maximising ventilation, retaining pupils in consistent groups if they can, promotion of good hand and respiratory hygiene, and encouraging schools to take a cautious, risk-based approach in deciding if they wish to hold any indoor events for pupils and or parents. There's also the PHA vaccination programme that's available to all staff and young people aged 12 and over. The benefits of the vaccination programme are now starting to be seen in the case levels for those age groups. There are some who believe that activities should be restricted in educational settings, and we should be being much more definitive in terms of what can and cannot be done in schools. And I believe that school leaders are best placed to decide what is appropriate for their individual circumstances and to know what works well in their school. A one-size-fits-all approach makes no distinction between a school that has a very small number of cases and one that has a high number. It also does not take account of the major differences between a small rural primary school and a large urban post-primary school. Guidance and support is therefore in place for all school leaders to decide how to mitigate the risks in their particular school, reflecting each school's individual circumstances. Following the emergence of Omicron, the Department of Health introduced a change in self-isolation policy whereby close contacts of positive Omicron cases have to self-isolate for 10 days. This currently applies to children and all adults, irrespective of vaccination status. I know the Department of Health are keeping this policy under constant review, and I'm aware that the UK government has moved to a daily testing approach rather than 10-day self-isolation. If the policy of 10-day self-isolation remains in place over the medium term, there is a potential for significant disruption for educational settings. My officials continue to engage with colleagues from the Department of Health on this policy, given the potential impact on pupils and the number of school staff able to attend school. This could accentuate the current staffing pressures across the education sector. In terms of how we will react if the Executive agrees that we need to introduce further mitigations or restrictions due to Omicron, this is a path we have been down previously, and my department will be able to react swiftly if required. As has been the case to date, we will continue to be guided by the Executive and the Department of Health in terms of the medical and scientific advice. In terms of our approach to contingency planning, my department continues to prepare for all scenarios across a range of areas. Last year saw a lot of work done on implementing mitigating measures in schools, and it's anticipated that if such additional measures are needed again in future, they could be introduced as required. These measures were part of my department's guidance that was developed in close partnership with health colleagues and the practitioners group of school leaders. The input from practitioners was crucial in understanding how issues may impact in schools and helped to shape the guidance and messaging. The guidance provided effective in earlier phases of the pandemic, and it enables schools to find an appropriate balance that allowed pupils to access as much of a normal educational experience as possible while managing the COVID risks involved. As we move in the Omicron phase of the pandemic, the department's COVID guidance continues to provide an overarching framework that can be revised to meet particular requirements the Department of Health will advise us on, and this will become clearer as the science on the Omicron variant develops. The uncertainties in the prevailing public health situation mean that it is impossible to know at this stage which measures will deliver the appropriate response in the future. Therefore, our ongoing close liaison with the Department of Health is crucial in determining the Department's response. We've previously had a wide range of mitigations and restrictions in place, therefore they can be stood up again as necessary, either in part or in full, and the detail can be explored with health colleagues, trade unions and the practitioners group of school leaders as required, and it will then be communicated to the education sector as early as possible. However, we shouldn't underestimate the negative impact that any reintroduction of measures would have on our children and young people. And it's for this reason that I would do what I can to ensure that pupils can continue to access face-to-face learning. The committee will also be aware of the staffing pressures that are currently affecting a number of schools due to staff absenteeism and the availability of substitute staff. Many schools have therefore been working under exceptionally challenging circumstances. I greatly appreciate the effort of our education sector staff and the invaluable work that they're doing to support our children and young people during this time. Our officials are currently urgently exploring options with others in the education sector in trying to help to alleviate the staffing challenges that many schools are facing. However, there are unlikely to be any easy or quick options that do not have a consequential negative impact elsewhere in the system. In order to mitigate against the impact of staff absences, the Education Authority has established an emergency resourcing team to provide additional support to schools experiencing staffing difficulties. The EA's emergency resourcing team has supported the establishment of a number of relief registers across a range of non-teaching roles, and also provides additional support to schools who have been unable to source teacher cover via NISTER. This includes almost 3,000 classroom assistants who can provide temporary cover in schools. Practical advice and support is also available to schools from their COVID-19 link officer and from the Education and Training Inspectorate. My department published a circular on the 6th of December giving further guidance on remote learning and the circumstances where it may be appropriate as a last resort for some pupils to learn remotely for a short period, including as a consequence of staff shortages. It's extremely important that we maximise face-to-face teaching for pupils, and that's why there are no plans to close schools early this term or to move to remote learning more generally across the education system. Any decision to close schools would be taken by the Northern Ireland Executive and be based on medical and scientific advice. I acknowledge the challenges that the staffing pressures are creating in some schools. My department will continue to explore what can be done to help alleviate these, as I believe our children's safe access to the curriculum is top priority for the Executive as we continue to respond to the challenges of the pandemic. My department has asked schools to have contingency plans in place for the delivery of remote learning when required. Our schools have access to a centrally provided IT system, C2K. This has supported online access to school services from the beginning of the COVID-19 school closures. Almost £7 million of funding has been provided since March 2020 to support remote learning, and this has enabled the provision of thousands of digital devices to educationally disadvantaged and vulnerable learners. It was also used to improve the online services available, including a number of additional learning applications and upgrading bandwidth.
Minister, sorry to cut across you. Is it okay to draw your remarks to a close shortly there? Just want to make sure we get as many questions as we can. Thanks.
Okay, I just want to also confirm that in line with Fair Start report, an additional £1 million will also be available this year to provide devices to schools from disadvantaged backgrounds, and this will obviously continue in future years. Obviously, this significant investment will support greater access to digital resources for children and young people. And this is something which the committee is particularly keen to see. And it's also important that our teachers are also well equipped. And you may note that I did make an announcement of an investment of £20 million to provide 20,000 new digital devices for teachers, and this will roll out in the new year. I'm happy to turn to qualifications at this stage, Chair, if you would like that, or if you prefer to take that in questions.
Yeah, maybe take that in questions, Minister. Appreciate it. Just conscious you're pushed for time this morning and want to try and make sure we get as many questions in as we can as well. Do you want to cover qualifications briefly there, and then we'll move to questions? Thanks.
Okay, just with regards to qualifications, it was necessary, as you know, to cancel public exams in 2020 and again in 2021. Schools obviously did an excellent job at pace with SEA to ensure our young people were awarded the qualifications that they need to progress. This year, along with the other UK jurisdictions, we're planning for a managed return to standardised public examinations to provide young people with the opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge, skills and understanding of the subjects they've been studying. However, as I previously stated, there cannot be a return to business as usual, and it's for that reason that adaptations have been made to SEA qualifications, obviously taking account of the disruption to children's learning. SEA, in line with the other UK exam bodies, will ensure that grading in 2022 takes account of the disruption experienced by learners and that they're not disadvantaged. My department has also agreed with SEA a number of contingency measures to facilitate the awarding of qualifications to those who may miss exams due to illness or self-isolation. This will include a reserve series of A2 candidates who miss exams to make sure as many young people as possible can complete their qualifications and progress to the next stage of education and training. My officials are obviously conscious of the fact that public health situation can change very quickly, and they're working with SEA to refine contingency arrangements for alternative awarding that can be activated quickly if needed, and these arrangements will be based largely on those used in 2021. And finally, there were a couple of other things that I wanted to speak to, but I'm happy to take those questions if necessary.
Okay, thanks, Minister. And members, I think we'll have approximately 5 minutes each for a question maximum, so we'll try and move promptly. Minister, for that reason, I'll get straight into questions, and thank you for your opening statement. When you were last with us on the 22nd of September, I raised 3 key aims that I thought was the focus for education for you this term: safety, attendance, and contingency. And you set out how you believe that the balance between safety and maximising attendance would be achieved by replacing the previous test, contact tracing and isolation policy in schools. There was previously a wider definition of close contact and isolation of 10 days with a very limited definition of close contact that led to few close contacts, few tests, and fewer isolations as a result of close contact. Is however, attendance actually lower this term than it would be for this term last year?
Attendance is slightly down compared to last year, but as you know, the issues within the community are slightly different, in so much as there is much more community contact, and I suppose that itself then is reflective in the numbers within the schools. Okay, and do you accept there is a staff shortage crisis in schools? There has been a considerable impact on the attendance of staff at schools, as you are aware. This has been, in the last week, it's increased to 1,455 members of staff. That is not insignificant. And I suppose that in itself has created challenges for schools in order to seek cover for those classes. Okay, that was the main priority of every teaching union that we engaged with last week, the staff shortage crisis in schools. So what contingency plan is in place now to address the staff shortage crisis in schools? Well, as you're aware, there are a number of options that we have been exploring in order to alleviate the pressures within school. EA have an emergency resourcing team who work very closely not only with special schools but schools right across the sector. We have been looking at a number of options, particularly in relation to the redeployment of qualified teachers from their roles in some of the department's arm's length bodies. This is obviously an option which is being looked at. However, these staff also carry out important roles in delivering statutory functions, so there may be issues with and certainly significant consequences if these services, if we were to go down that route. You'll know we've also explored the option of student teachers. That in itself has become quite problematic, particularly when we've spoken to the colleges, given the fact that a number of those students have had quite a disruptive time over the last couple of years, particularly those within the B.Ed sector, and obviously PGCE students that would not have the experience. We've also looked at, and we're continuing to look at the issue around retired teachers, and while some retired teachers have joined the register, we will be looking to make a further call to add them to the register, and any issues in relation to registration can be worked at pace.
Okay, how many teachers have been redeployed from other roles, or retired teachers? How many redeployed or retired teachers have been added to the NISTA register?
Maybe I could ask Alison if she has the detail in relation to that.
We're actually currently we're going to make the call. We haven't got additional people on the register just yet. The EA have been sanitising the register to make sure that all of those are available, can be made available immediately to the school system, and making sure that people are booked out as and when they take up posts.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, we know that, and we've known for quite some time, that a key mitigation for transmission in schools that would obviously help with safety, pupil and staff attendance is ventilation. How many schools and what percentage of schools have CO2 monitors and air filtration devices fitted?
As you'll be aware, we've obviously secured an extra £2 million in relation to the purchase of CO2 monitors and other things in association with ventilation. To date, 11,500 CO2 monitors have been distributed around schools. That was completed yesterday. There is a further procurement order has been made for 5,000 additional CO2 monitors, and that's in the process of being expedited. With regards to filtration units, as you'll be aware, there has been differing views to the effectiveness of these. However, my department and through EA have been working with the Department for Education on the mainland, who I understand are testing and piloting a couple of models, and obviously we will follow on from that. The advice that has been given from the outset is really that these should not be a substitute for fresh air, and obviously ensuring that classrooms are well ventilated between classes. There's also £1 million as now of capital has been set aside in order to look at replacement windows. As you're aware, there are issues across our estate.
Okay, appreciate that, Minister. That my time is up. So in summary then, the new approach to testing, contact tracing and isolation, the change to that, the attendance is lower. You have a staff shortage crisis in school, and 0 redeployed or retired teachers have been added to the NISTA register, and we don't know if any air filtration devices are fitted in school. We're endeavouring to be constructive, Minister, but by any assessment, this is a failing approach to those key aims of safety, attendance and contingency for our schools. And I think most of the members have been inundated in relation to these issues, and there is a real urgent need for greater provision in all of those key areas to ensure that you do achieve that aim of maximising safety and attendance in school. And I have to say, having glanced at the letter that has been issued to principals today, I don't think they're going to feel reassured or that there is anything new in that letter that they've received. Conscious of time, I'll let you respond to that briefly if you wish, and then I'll bring other members in.
And thank you for your comments. Obviously, just in relation to that, and I suppose you have a view. But the information obviously that's coming from schools with regards to attendance, that is not all COVID related, and I suppose that needs to be taken into consideration. In fact, that we are we always, as we do, have winter pressures from flu and other issues. My department was working very closely with schools in order to ensure that schools are safe. You'll understand that this there isn't a one-size-fits-all to all of these things, and we're very much mindful that schools are responding. There are obviously some schools which are harder hit than others.
Thanks. Can I bring in Pat Sheehan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and you're very welcome here this morning, Minister. And I just want to reflect on your time in office, well, 5 or 6 months or whatever it is. And I would have to say I'm very much in agreement with the line that the Chair has taken there, that your time in office has been characterised by a lack of planning and preparation. So first of all, we had the debacle around teacher registration. New teacher registration, and you finally moved on that now, although it's still unclear how new teachers are going to be the registration of new teachers is going to be expedited. We had the chaos in the schools when they reopened after the summer in regard to contact tracing, and your own officials advised this committee that there had been no discussion with the department and the PHA to ascertain whether there was sufficient capacity in the PHA for testing when schools reopened. We've had the situation that the Chair has already mentioned, where school principals are blue in the face, asking you to do something about the acute shortage of teachers and substitute teachers. So, I mean, why was there not a plan, a strategy in place? There are a number of things that could have been done. You could have gone out very publicly in the way the health service did and asked for retired teachers to come back into the system. We're hearing today not one retired teacher has been added to the register. Similarly, with the redeployment of staff from the department and EA, not one put back on the register. We've already mentioned the issue of student teachers, and despite what is in the media today, I mean, that's still an option that should have been looked at. In terms of ventilation, what planning has there been put in place there? Wales, from early in the summer, made £7 million available for CO2 monitors and air filtration systems. The South IC has made £70 million available so that HEPA air filtration systems can be installed in all schools. And I mean, there has been no planning there at all. Looking at it and listening to teachers, listening to unions, listening to parents, and listening to your feeble excuses about the lower attendance in this term in comparison to last year. There are winter pressures every year, Minister, not just this year. You can't use that as an excuse for the lower attendances. And I mean, what I would like to know now is, given the concerns around the new variant and the suggestions that there may be as many as 11,000 cases per day come the end of this month, schools are going to be closing hand over fist. Teachers are going to be absent, whether through contracting the virus themselves or having to care for their own children or others in their own homes. Classrooms are going to be empty. What are your contingency plans? What are the contingency plans now for examinations in the time ahead? Because it appears to me that there has been absolutely no planning or preparation. And I'd like to hear your comments on that, Minister. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And you've obviously you've covered quite a number of things there in your question. Firstly, with regards to teacher registration, obviously that will continue and will be expedited by the staff at GTC NI, and there shouldn't be any disruption in relation to that. You talked about chaos, obviously, at the start of September with regards to contact tracing. I moved swiftly along with the Health Minister in order to address the pressures that principals were under at that particular time in regards to contact tracing, and that while it may not be seen to be perfect, it certainly has improved the situation quite considerably in alleviating both the pressure for principals, but also ensuring that young people are not unnecessarily out of school. With regards to the numbers of registrations on the NISTR register, I understand that an additional 1,412 new registrations have been processed on NISTR during 2021. 800 of these have been processed since July. There are absolutely issues with regards to NISTR and accessibility, but I understand, and I'll give you an example of this. On the 7th of December, there were 7,242 teachers in the live NISTR pool, of which 4,235 were recorded as having at least one booking on the system, that leaving 3,007 having no bookings. And yet on the same day, we understand that schools were having difficulties accessing people and making an excess of maybe 50 calls. There are issues with regards to NISTR being updated, and that is something that we have asked schools to ensure is done appropriately each day, and those who are on the register. We are working alongside colleagues in EA and ETI and in other areas within education in order to see where we can free up additional staff, but as I've said, there are consequences in doing so. There are also issues in relation to teachers making sure that they're suitably qualified and that they are registered. I mean, so there's a piece of work that needs to be had around all of that, but we are working where we can in order to increase the number of people who are available to work within schools. With regards to the money which has been allocated for ventilation, you will appreciate that I came into the role in June. I was able to and worked with officials in order to put in a successful bid for ventilation for CO2 monitors. I received £2 million. I'm not sure if I was able to bid any more, that I would have got any more given the financial constraints that there are within the executive. But that work is continuing, and we're ensuring that we work very closely with schools.
Okay, Minister, thanks.
Well,
Final question. Sorry, thanks.
Contingency plans. I was going to call John Smith, if you don't mind.
Okay, briefly, please, John. I really need us to move more concisely than we are so far. I'm not going to get all members in. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you know, you'll remember that we developed a range of measures last year in terms of our guidance, you know, with health department colleagues and the practitioners group of school principals, and that really enabled schools to reopen effectively last year, with some mitigations which remain in place, particularly around face coverings in post-primary schools. So obviously...
No, sorry, could I interrupt there?
Go ahead,
I mean, you're really going off on a tangent here somewhere, and it's not addressing the questions that I asked. And maybe if I ask this specific question, we could get an answer to it. When does the Minister envisage having CO2 monitors and air filtration systems installed in every school? When is that going to happen? Because if we're talking about keeping our schools open, we need mitigations in place. We need enough staff to teach children. We need proper ventilation. None of these mitigations have been put in place. You're in post 6 months, Minister, and we can't point to any sort of air filtration system in any of our schools whatsoever. When is that going to happen?
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Pat. So, Minister, very specific question. When will all schools be fitted with air filtration devices? And then I'll move to Robin Newton, please. Thanks, Minister.
Okay, at this stage, I understand that they're still being piloted and tested, and I'll ask John for the detail with regards to when that's likely to be seen in schools.
11,500 CO2 monitors have now been delivered to every school in Northern Ireland. I think it's important to remember that fresh air is the best thing for schools, and the HEPA filtration units are only to be used when good ventilation is impossible to be achieved. So we're encouraging schools to keep the windows open, refresh the air between classes, and use the CO2 monitors that they've got as a proxy for when, as an indicator as to when the windows needs to be open. The EA has a team of maintenance officers that are there to support schools throughout this process. We are piloting HEPA monitors, and once we got to the end of that process, we'll take a decision as to about how they need to be procured and deployed.
Okay, thanks for that. And Chair, just finally, I didn't get an answer about contingency plans for exams and so forth in the event of this Omicron being as bad as we're expecting it to be. Thanks.
Okay, hopefully we can cover that in other answers, Pat. Appreciate that. Thank you. Robin Newton, MLA, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the Minister for being with us today. And I do have to offer an apology, Minister, because I had, when this meeting was scheduled, I already had appointments in the diary around constituency matters. So after my 5 minutes with you, Minister, I will need to move on and leave the committee. Minister, could I just maybe continue the discussion around previous two members' issues? Minister, you'll be aware of the calls for circuit breakers, early closures of schools, phased returns or late returns to schools, and indeed keeping children in school, which I think is the preferred option by the Chief Medical Officer, who indicated that our schools are indeed safe. Maybe could I ask you, Minister, in terms of the relationship between the Education Department, Public Health Authority, the Chief Medical Officer, any concerns that there are at the Executive in terms of closure of schools or late returns to schools, any safety measures that the Chief Medical Officer has raised about our pupils being in school at this moment in time. And maybe if John could maybe just say a bit more, if that's okay, Minister, on the 11,000 monitors that have been allocated to schools.
Okay, obviously my department works very closely with the Department of Health and the PHA in all aspects of COVID. There are regular meetings with regards to that. You will be aware within the last couple of weeks, and it was reaffirmed this week, that really moving to a mass closure of schools would be a last resort, and our priority is very much about keeping our children and young people at school, not only obviously for their educational benefits, but also issues with regards to their emotional health and well-being. We've spent a considerable amount of time and money over the last number of months in trying to rectify some of the issues that have occurred as a consequence of the closure. There will be a long legacy as a result of the prolonged closures last year, and it'll be very difficult really to quantify the impact on our children and young people. So the Chief Medical Officer, as you'll be aware, has consistently said that schools are safe and that pupils should remain in school. If we were to look at closures of schools, I think it seems to be quite a complex issue with regards to the impact this may have on the R number. Given the fact that the rest of the community remains open, obviously children not being in school will be out in the community and infection will still rise. So obviously there is a consequence to all of these things, but we continue to work very closely. John also sits on the task force, so working closely with other colleagues in other departments around the executive as well, to see what the approach will be. We are very mindful of Omicron, and we are working very closely alongside other departments on various scenarios were the situation to change quite considerably in January. We have referenced a number of times now in the session with regards to the ventilation. 11,500 have CO2 monitors have rolled out. There is an order now for an additional 5,000 But again, I suppose from the very beginning, we've been very clear that fresh air is required in classrooms, and CO2 monitors are not going to compensate for that. But happy to call John back in again, just with regards to maybe perhaps the contingencies and discussions with PHA and Department of Health.
So yeah, we meet the Department of Health and PHA colleagues along with the EA on a weekly basis. We've had that relationship ongoing probably since the beginning of the pandemic, and it's proved really effective. Helps us to keep abreast of the ongoing epidemiological situation, and also helps us to devise our guidance for schools in terms of the responses and the restrictions that were introduced, and help the schools to come out of restrictions earlier on in 2021. And we want to keep that going. Obviously with the Omicron variant, we're moving into a whole new phase of the pandemic, and we need to be vigilant. And as the health situation changes and the executive position moves forward, we will move in step with that. And if we need to plan to reintroduce some measures that were previously stood down, then we can move to do that as required by the continuing situation and the directions from the executive.
Thank you, John. Would you consider that is effective planning?
I think I would. To be fair, we worked really hard last year to produce a really comprehensive set of guidance, which proved effective in terms of when we were closing schools, and then in the phase when we were reopening the schools. And so, as the pandemic moves along, in tandem with any further restrictions in wider society, the education sector is best placed to respond in that regard, and we can look at a gradated response as to how we bring in, if required, any additional measures that from that guidance. That's our toolkit, in essence, Robin, in terms of how we would respond as necessary.
If I might just add a little bit to that, Mr. Newton.
Very, very briefly, please. Thanks.
Yes, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the point, I think it is important to remember that the great majority of schools are fully open at the current time. That there's some 88% of pupils are attending school. And that is a credit to the work of the school principals and the teaching staff, and to the arrangements that are currently in place. And of course there are problems. I mean, there are 1,455 staff who have tested positive out of a workforce of 48,000. That's 3% of the entire workforce. But the issue is that is concentrated in a number of schools, and there can be problems in particular schools, and that is what is coming through from the teachers' unions and from particular schools. Some schools can have absence of up to 20%, but other schools by definition will have much lower levels of absence. So we have to keep, I think, the current position in perspective. The vast majority of pupils are in school, the vast majority of schools are operating effectively, but as we look to Omicron, we have to make sure that we have appropriate processes in place to be able to react, and that is what the Minister has just outlined.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Okay.
Chair, could I just, if you indulge me for a second, in terms
That's
of
7 minutes, so please be brief, and then Daniel, get ready.
I will be brief, Chair. I do have to go after this.
Okay, thanks.
Minister, it seems like a simple solution just to go and capture a number of student teachers in their final year and deploy them into schools. You seem to indicate that there was advice given that may not be as easily achievable as it might seem.
No, it isn't, and I think we just have to reflect on the fact that those student teachers have had a very disrupted period in their own training. Many of them are already out in schools for work placement, and while they may be able to supervise classes, they certainly can't teach classes because they aren't qualified. They certainly aren't registered with GTCNI. There may be insurance issues as well. Notwithstanding, then there's issues with regards to PGCE students who have only started their courses. So again, they wouldn't have the experience. But certainly the very strong advice that we're receiving from the colleges is that this would not be an appropriate sort of move, and certainly wouldn't be able to address the issues that we currently have.
Okay. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Chair. Can I wish the Minister, her team, and indeed the members of the committee and the staff at the committee there a very happy Christmas and a peaceful New Year. Thank you, Chair.
You too, Robin. Thanks very much. Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being with us, with your colleagues, and for taking questions from the committee on the important pressures and challenges that exist. Minister, we've been told continually by you in your tenure, but also by your predecessor, that keeping schools open is a priority, that keeping children and staff, all school staff, safe is a priority. It's very difficult to see how that's going to happen if there isn't any clear contingency plans in place to ensure that that will be the reality. The Omicron variant is now here. It is spreading and spreading fast throughout our communities and will undoubtedly do so throughout Christmas. So with that said, Minister, is there clear contingency plans in place to protect children, to protect staff, and to ensure that schools are open? I have a series of questions, Minister, and I would just really like, they're one-word answered questions, because I think that's what we need to get down to, given the time pressure that exists.
Well, can I just say that really we're not starting from zero with regards to this. There's been a considerable amount of work has been done over the last 21 months. There are already mitigation measures are already in schools. You'll be aware that obviously from the statement in August, where we advised schools on how to sort of move forward to the next term, there was allowed a great deal of flexibility. Bubbles still remain in the majority of primary schools, and issues with regards to hand sanitising, all of those issues are still in place. So really what we will be doing, and as John has outlined as well, we work very closely with the Department of Health and the PHA, and we can move much more quickly perhaps than we were able to last year with regards to remote learning.
Okay, so with that said, Minister, obviously this pandemic is a very fluid situation. We're dealing with a variant that is reported to be 2.5 times more transmissible than anything that has gone before during the last number of years. Even the Prime Minister, not that I like quoting him too often, is speaking of a tidal wave of cases in January. So do you believe that the contingency plans that you have in place are sufficient to tackle the level of transmission and to ensure that we can keep schools open and to ensure that we can protect our staff within these schools?
Obviously, that's still our plan, and we'll work very closely with the Department of Health with regards to that. And there will be a decision that will be based on scientific advice that will be taken then by the executive.
And in terms of the planning measures in respect of the anticipated escalation of the Omicron cases throughout the school community, has this been communicated to schools as of yet? And if not, when will it be communicated to schools?
I wrote obviously to schools this morning with regards to the fact that there will be challenges coming in January, and obviously any change will be communicated swiftly. If you're happy enough, I'll move to John with regards to some of the detail around.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's important. I think it's important to remember that there are a range of measures that, as the Minister said, we're not starting from scratch here, that have been in place in schools for the past 12 months at least, and continue to be in place to keep them as safe as possible and ensure that pupils can remain in. For example, we encourage social distancing where possible in schools, consistent year groups where possible, particularly in primary schools, but we know that there are particular challenges around that within the post-primary sector in terms of the delivery of the curriculum. We've put out lots of guidance to encourage good ventilation in schools in terms of advice and support from the EA maintenance officers. We've put 11,500 CO2 monitors in school, which are a good proxy for determining when the air needs to be refreshed. There's £1 million of capital in place for priority works for replacement of windows. We've encouraged schools to take a really cautious approach to hosting indoor events, and remain within the executive's guidance for indoor events in that regard, carrying out risk assessments where they need to. The vaccination programme is available, as you would be aware, to everybody over the age of 12, and we encourage uptake in that regard. There's been a long-standing programme of in-school and homeschool lateral flow device testing. And again, we encourage all pupils and staff, as appropriate, to take a test the day before they return to school in January.
Just if I could, Chair, I'm aware of the broad measures that are in place. My concern really lies with the level of transmission that is likely to come as a result of this variant. And if it is 2.5 times more transmissible, then we have a big problem for our schools. And really, it's about what's going to happen if, in the event that we can't find a teacher or a sub-teacher to cover a classroom, what's going to happen with remote learning, all those sorts of things. There needs to be very clear planning in place to ensure that in every scenario, principals are able to respond to that particular crisis. Now, we could talk about this issue all day. I do want to touch on an important issue, given where we're at, Chair, if you indulge me slightly. I was stunned recently, Minister, I'm going off a wee bit from the variant, but I was stunned recently to hear the proposal coming from the Executive, the Finance Minister, that education is going to endure an immediate 2% cut to its funding. Now, that's completely shocking, given that we're already seeing a considerable deficit within education, and we already know the severe and serious challenges that exist, particularly given this virus. Can I ask you, Minister, are you aware of any other jurisdiction that is planning a 2% cut to education in these times, and how concerned are you in relation to it? And further to that, can you also confirm, is this 2% cut on top of the growing deficit that I've just mentioned? We were provided those figures on the 24th of November, and the budget process 22-25 process resource capital bids, which projected a 543.45 million shortfall in essential costs by 2024-25 school year.
No, I'm not aware of any other jurisdiction that's reducing their education budget. This is something which I've been extremely concerned about since it was mooted early in my tenure. I have been in constant contact with the Department of Finance, highlighting the pressures that are likely to occur. As you will be aware, that there has been a prolonged, for quite a period of time, reduction in real terms in the education budget. We're estimating by year 3 of this current budget that there could be pressures of around £459 million. As you also will be aware from your time on the committee, that this department currently really needs to go with the begging bowl each monitoring round for what are our core parts of our delivery programme, in particular in relation to SEN. So I am extremely concerned about the impact that this will have on education moving forward, regardless of whether I'm in post or not. I think we should be conscious of the fact that education is core to everything that we do as a society.
Okay, thanks, Daniel.
So just to follow on from one point, Chair, Minister, speaking to a senior educator at the from university in Liverpool, and he is of the view, given the level of cuts that have continued to come into place in Northern Ireland over the last number of years, that the Executive continually fail to prioritise education within their budget. In fact, he believes it's not even on the radar as a priority, children's education in any way, shape or form. The level of this cut is going to be severe. It's going to affect children's education in the classroom, let alone the measures that are going to be put in place or needed in place to protect their education against this variant. So in your words, very short and brief, Minister, how concerned are you about this cut?
I'm extremely concerned about the cut, and I welcome your comments and I welcome your support in relation to this. I have made this very clear when I've spoken to the Department of Finance and the Minister, and also to colleagues in the Executive. While of course health is a priority, I am concerned at what point education no longer became the priority, because obviously there are quite difficult decisions that will have to be made as a consequence of this, and that worries me greatly.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. If a financial crisis of this scale doesn't drive significant reform of education, I really don't know what will. Robbie Butler has had to leave, Minister, but he has asked, could I ask you, what is your assessment of the equitability of learning pupils are experiencing from non-subject or needs-specific teachers, and any impact you think this might have on fairness of exams?
Obviously, there will be concern with regards to not having specialist teachers. I would hope that will only be for short term and that will not be prolonged within schools. There is obviously a considerable amount of work that's being done along with my department and SIA with regards to the impact that may have on examinations. And if you're content, I'll defer to Suzanne just with regards to that and the impact that may have on examinations ultimately.
Yeah, thanks, Minister. I think it's important to say there's been significant modifications to all SIA, GCSE, AS and A-level qualifications, and those removal of a significant number of exams out of each qualification, they are designed to take account of the quite significant levels of disruption that our pupils have experienced during the last 2 years. So that reduction is there so that there's a greater focus on preparing for a smaller number of exams, and they take account of both disruption to the child's experience and also some level of disruption in the classroom. And I think if we compare our situation where we made announcements last May to modify our qualifications in advance of this academic year, if we compare that to other jurisdictions where announcements are still pending, it's very favourable and clear for pupils what the pathway is. We're also the only jurisdiction to have in place detailed plans for pupils who miss exams, including a planned reserve series for our A-level students. And in the background to all that, the department has been working closely with CCEA to have in place contingency arrangements should exams need to be cancelled. The committee will appreciate that the focus at present is on maintaining public exams as it is in other jurisdictions across the UK, but backup plans are there should they be needed. They can be activated at pace. The alternative awarding arrangements last year were highly successful. Thousands of young people were able to complete their qualifications, and we had the lowest ever number of appeals. So we have plans that have been successful and that can be reactivated at pace. So I think we're in a good place in terms of all our contingency planning around examinations.
Okay, obviously exams have already taken place this year in November.
Yes.
And there was no need for additional modifications in relation to those?
Well, the exams that took place in November were an opportunity for children to sit some GCSE modules early. Those qualifications have had reductions. For example, children were taking exams in GCSE English language. The controlled assessment has been removed from that qualification. Children were taking exams in single and double award science. The exams have been removed from that qualification, and similarly in GCSE maths, the children were able to benefit from formula sheets. So the modifications that I'm talking about are part of that series. Those children have completed modules, but they continue their studies, the majority of them in those subjects.
Okay. And is there a level of non-subject specific substitute teaching that a pupil would experience that should activate modification in examination?
The modifications, Chair, that I'm talking about are in place for every young person across Northern Ireland. They've been provided, as I say, last May, to make sure that every young person has fewer exams to study for, that there's a smaller number of mandatory units to cover, to take account of the fact that there will be disruption to their teaching and learning. Okay,
that sounds like one size fits all, which you guys normally tell me isn't the right thing to do, but I'll keep members coming in here. Diane Dodds, MLA, please.
Thank you, Chair. And we note that you've just had your second round of questioning. So
on behalf of Robbie, by the way, but thanks for that, Diane. Go ahead.
Subsequent questions weren't.
Okay. You've used 30 seconds of yours. Thanks, bye.
We don't need any more mansplaining Just let us get on with it. Can I, first of all, say and acknowledge the work that the department has done, but also teachers and school leaders in relation to children's education. I have visited, Minister, a number of schools in my constituency. Indeed, you visited a number with us. And the impact there of schools being closed, of disruption, is very, very clear. Do you want to give us very, very briefly a very quick outline of what you see as the impact of COVID on children's education and why it's so important to ensure that children remain with face-to-face teaching?
I thank you for the question. Obviously, it was a pleasure to visit a number of schools in the Upper Bann area in the last number of weeks. And I think whenever we do speak to those young people, particularly those who are about to start their A-levels, the fact that this will be the first time that they will actually have sat public examinations, and I think we can't underestimate then the pressure that will be placed on them, and also the uncertainty that there is in advance of that, whether exams will go ahead or not. And I think we need to be very clear that that is our intention, and that we do give them that assurance. I think there isn't any year group that I have come across speaking to principals and teachers that haven't been impacted by COVID-19. As you'll know, as a former teacher, that learning is progressive, and if we miss anything along that line, that it will have an impact. We're also very mindful of the fact that not all young people have supportive home lives. There are challenges for them at home. They may not have access to devices, but they also may not just have that support. And we also are aware that school is also the safest place for them. And we need to ensure that there is that continuity and that there is that support given to all our young people, regardless of where they live and regardless of their backgrounds. But I think we're all united, and certainly the executive was united in the fact that the best place for our young people is at school. You'll be aware that a number of interventions have had to take place as a consequence of COVID. There's been the Engage programme, which has been very successful. And the response that we're getting back from schools is that is making a difference. But there's also issues with regards to their emotional health and well-being. And we are fortunate in so much that we have a framework in place. But as a consequence of that, there has been significant budget that has been required in order to support that. Now, many of the issues will have been there pre-COVID, but certainly COVID has shone a light on some very sort of extreme issues with regards to behavioural change. And if you're happy enough, I can ask Ricky maybe to expand on some of that.
Sorry, I'm conscious that the chair will cut me off. So there's 2 or 3 other questions that I think are really important to draw out in relation to this area. So you and I spoke to students at Portadown College recently, young people who are about to sit their A-levels, who have never sat formal exams. They were looking forward to demonstrating their ability. Are you determined to keep exams on course and as much as possible to keep children in face-to-face learning?
Yes, and that has been our plan from the beginning. In the knowledge of the lessons that we've learned from the last lockdown, that a mass lockdown is not what our young people need. I think we need to be mindful, as Mark referred to earlier, is that different schools have had different experiences with COVID. Some obviously have managed reasonably well because of the level of infection within the school and the impact on staff. Whereas others have been impacted quite considerably and have had to move to remote learning. But in all of those instances, that should be very much a short intervention as opposed to something which is longer term.
Thank you. A couple of last questions from me. I mean, many of the teachers that I have talked to in my constituency are determined to keep school open, and I applaud and acknowledge the enormous work that they've gone to actually achieve that. But many of them also mention the fact that they worry for the safety of some of their vulnerable pupils within that context. Have you done specific work and what acknowledgement has been made? Because we've already heard really high profile cases in the media around children and the safety of children when they cannot get to school and there are not those outside interventions, or the only interventions that can be taken place are remote interventions. Can we make sure that children are safe and that school is a safe place for children and really the best place for children? And the last question I have is, what will the impact be of the budget cuts? Can you give us some specific examples of what the impact will be of the budget cuts if the executive continues on this trajectory of failing to prioritise children's education?
Okay, no, thank you for your questions. And obviously, I suppose we need to commend, and we can't commend our staff enough with regards to the work that they have undertaken over the last 21 months. It has been a prolonged period of stress and disruption for them. And certainly whenever I speak to teachers, their focus is very much on the children in their care. And they do worry, they're concerned, and they are of a voice that they feel that those young people need to be in school. Obviously, those students who are vulnerable, be they those who have who have been identified within the system, and others, they obviously need to be our priority. And we work very closely with the Department of Health and Social Services in order to ensure that those young people are protected. Obviously, schools, even during the lockdown, were very mindful of those who were vulnerable, who reached out to families to try to ensure and encourage the young people to be at school. We need to commend those schools who went above and beyond at that particular time, but very much the focus was about protecting those young people. With regards to the budget, as I said to Daniel McCrossan, I'm extremely concerned as to the impact that will have. There will be issues, particularly with regards to the delivery of the SEND Act. If there are any recommendations coming forward from the Independent Review of Education, you'll be aware that a number of years ago, the Department of Education went through a period of cuts, which meant that low-lying fruit, as it was called, was taken away. We're actually now at the stage where this is now affecting the core aspects of our business, and that concerns me. And perhaps Mark might want very briefly to reiterate some of the issues.
Yeah, I think we could expect to see, with increasing pressure on school budgets and increasing numbers of schools going into deficit, it's going to have an impact as we look forward on our capacity to implement in full the emotional health and wellbeing framework that we have identified, and we will have to look at important aspects of our programs like Fair Start, where we have additional expenditure, our budget required over the next number of years, which we will not be able to afford, and we'll have to make some very, very hard decisions that will impact on some of the most vulnerable children in our society. Because in making those decisions, we will have to look to safeguard our statutory functions, as all departments have to, and many of those programmes that impact on the most vulnerable actually go beyond the statutory functions. So there will be some very, very difficult choices to have to make going forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan. Thanks for that. For the avoidance of any doubt, Minister, no one in this Education Committee has referred to mass lockdown, as you did in your recent comments there. No one is asking for mass lockdowns here. They're asking for proper mitigation, effective test, trace, isolate, effective ventilation, effective staff cover, guidance on remote learning. No one is asking for a lockdown of schools. Can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for attending here this morning, and thanks to all your officials. It's good to have you here in front of the committee. Honestly, I found this meeting really frustrating this morning. I don't understand the delays. Myself as a committee member, myself as an MLA, as I've been in receipt of so many letters and emails and correspondence from pupils and from parents and from principals and from teaching unions, really desperately cried out for help and some sort of guidance from the department and from yourself, Minister. So I find it really frustrating that on the 17th of December, we've been told that there's been no official call for additional teachers from the EA. I really think that's not good enough, especially after the teaching unions came in and told us specifically that that was a major issue they had was with staff shortages. And back to Diane's previous point there about the importance of schools being open. We all fully agree with that there. We want our kids to be in school learning. That's the best place for them. And for all the reasons you outlined yourself, Minister, I completely agree with that. But the reality is schools are having to close. Just this morning, a school in my area had sent out a letter, including to my niece, asking parents to keep their children at home today and to be learning remotely from next week because they don't have the staff. So that's the reality of it. Schools are having to close because the mitigations aren't in place. So honestly, it's really frustrating that there are these delays. I'm going to move on to some questions. My first one is about what is being done to address and look after the well-being of head teachers and all school staff actually who are understandably under immense pressure at the moment. The committee received a letter last week from the principal of a nursery school in Omagh who was advised to take time off by her GP, take time off work by her GP because of the stress. Well, I'm not sure the actual reasons, but she couldn't take the time off because she is a teaching principal. She's no funded release time because she's no vice principal to deputise any work to. So obviously that's a massive issue for her personally, but right across the board. Can you tell me what you're doing to look after the well-being of head teachers across the board, and particularly in nursery schools where principals are also teachers, please?
Okay, and thank you for that question. And I am very mindful of the fact that there have been enormous pressures on head teachers particularly and staff more widely. I met with a number of principals just on Wednesday, and obviously the strain was very evident, and they were emotional, and I absolutely understand that this has been an incredibly difficult time for them. EA obviously have been working quite closely with teachers and with head teachers in order to try to assist them, particularly in relation to next steps with sourcing staff, and also if they need to move to the likes of remote learning, that support is in place. The well-being generally is something which I know the unions are very mindful of even before COVID, and the workload that was in place for those particular members of staff. If you don't mind, I'll ask Alison to come in on that issue.
Yeah, and just go back to your point about the formal call for additional teachers. Whilst there hasn't been a formal call yet, we are looking at that. There has certainly been informal approaches, and there has been a number of people who've joined the register as a result of that. As the Minister referred to earlier, there's 1,400 additional people on the register. In terms of well-being for our head teachers, they have access to the Aspire programme through the EA, which offers counselling and mentoring services, up to 6 sessions if they choose to avail of that service. There's also additional support being provided by EA staff and the COLOs. ETI staff do pastoral visits on a regular basis through the GI visits. So there is a range of support out there for principals to access, and actually the communities of practice that have been established across the system proves very valuable for principals to actually engage with each other and look at best practice and learning that's across the system.
Thanks for that, Alison. I'm glad there are some supports there for head teachers, and I hope they actually get the time to avail of those supports, really. I think, again, I just think it's so important that we are there to support them through such an incredibly stressful time. The other topic I wanted to touch upon was the childcare sector, which hasn't been mentioned today so far. So I know, Minister, that you have extended the childcare temporary closure fund until December this year. First of all, have you any plans to extend that into next year for that sector? And I've also been contacted by registered childminders as well about the childcare sustainability fund, because that wasn't extended whenever you extended the temporary closure fund. Can you tell me why you didn't extend the sustainability fund, and if you have any plans to do that, and even to backdate it to, I think it was October was the last payment was made for that?
Okay, just with regards to that, we're working obviously very closely with the sector with regards to that. Just this week, I looked at the extension with regards to insurance cover, and that will be extended for an additional 3 months in order to give them some support. With regards to additional funding, all of that obviously needs to go through to DOF. So we're working very, very closely with them with regards to that, but obviously very cognizant of the pressures on childcare sector, and particularly as we move into the new year, and how that may impact them directly if advice changes, particularly around working practices.
So just to confirm, you are able to extend the indemnity to March 2022?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But no update on the temporary closure fund yet?
I am happy to come back to you on that.
Thank you, Minister. I think that's a really important one for the childcare sector, because they're under severe pressure themselves at the moment. The final question I want to ask was what mitigations you're putting in for special schools and SEN provision specifically at the moment. Again, they're getting very hard hit with all the pressures, and just like the point we made about the importance of having kids at school, it's even more important that children with special education needs in special schools are remained open for themselves and for the families. It's such a crucial time for those kids. So can you just tell me what mitigations you're putting in place to ensure that those schools can remain open safely, please?
Yeah, as you'll be aware, obviously, we work very closely with special schools, and I suppose special schools felt the pressures of short staff shortages probably earlier than other schools, particularly around specialist care needs as well. The department meets regularly with the Special Schools Strategic Leadership Group, and we also have the Emergency Resourcing Team at EA works very closely with the SSSLG in order to make sure that we do have an immediate response to the staffing challenges. I know that obviously some special schools have had to close for short periods of time, and that's something that we would want to avoid, but we do work very closely with them in order to assist them. We've also been working with the FE colleges in relation to classroom assistance and making them aware of the emergency register, just to ensure that maybe students who have a particular focus on special needs can then be drawn into those school settings in order to assist. But we do work very closely with special schools because they're obviously particularly vulnerable young people who attend them.
Yeah, thank you for that, Minister. I completely agree that I just think we need to pay particular attention and make sure there's particular support there for special schools and for SEN provision in mainstream schools as well. But listen, thanks very much. I really appreciate your time, and thanks everybody. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. Justin McIlveen MLA, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister. Thanks, folks, for your participation in committee today and for your answers to your questions to the questions before. It's probably appropriate that the lights have gone off. One principal contacted me saying he feels like the teachers and principals they feel like mushrooms, feel like they've been kept in the dark. And on that, I'm not belittling that. I'm not making little of that at all. I'm not making a joke out of it, because that's how serious it is, that teachers and principals feel like they've been kept in the dark too much in relation to COVID guidance and COVID supports and the whole COVID situation. They want you to genuinely consult, publish your contingency plans, and stop talking hot air. They want to feel like they're being listened to, and at present they sadly don't. And in terms of the well-being of principals and staff, they're at the ends of their tethers. You know, the teachers are worried sick. They do not want to miss out on their family Christmas because of the COVID situation. They want to keep teaching. They want to keep schools open. Parents are worried. Parents are voting with their feet after today, Minister. A lot of parents are going to keep their kids home after today because they want their kids to be able to experience Christmas. That's just the reality on the ground. And the situation where we've discussed the student teachers' availability to keep schools open, because there is a staff crisis most likely coming down the tracks here, Minister, because of this new variant. How is it going to be possible to keep schools open, given the most likely staffing shortages. And I know there is the issues around availability of student teachers, but paraphrasing Conor Cruz O'Brien, it's a Gubu situation here. Can we circumvent the constraints that are in place to ensure that, as best as possible, schools do remain open? Because we all do appreciate the best place for children is at school, as long as it's safe for them, for the teacher, staff, and for parents alike. What are your thoughts on that, Minister? I know there are constraints in relation to availability of student teachers, but given the Gubu scenario we're facing, can things be circumvented?
Well, I think the issues in relation to student teachers are, and the concerns are quite real with regards to not only their experience, but also their ability to be able to be in the classroom even on their own with regards to indemnity. They aren't registered teachers, and essentially they won't be able to fulfil the role unless they are supervised. So that in itself presents a problem, and a real problem for us. The other option obviously is in relation to retired teachers. Some retired teachers are on the register, but perhaps they may be selective about some of the posts they may take. They may have their own concerns with regards to teaching during the COVID pandemic. But what we are saying is that we will be putting a call out for teachers to return, as we did in the early part of this pandemic with regards to volunteers. And we may look then to stand that list up in January if we need to, but we will be able to fast track any teacher, any retired teacher who wishes to come forward and to rejoin the workforce, and ensuring that that they can get into the classroom as quickly as possible. But we are very much relying on goodwill and for people to come forward. I mean, it's incredibly difficult if you don't have personnel identifying themselves as ready to work. So it's about working with what we have. But I am very mindful with regards to the NISTA register and ensuring that is kept up to date. And we're also working with regards to looking at redeploying, is maybe the wrong word, but the use of engaged teachers. However, there are issues probably with regards to how they are currently being paid, but those are conversations that we're going to have with DOF as to whether there's flexibility for them to be able to move across and to be able then to cover classes when needed.
Okay, thanks, Minister. A message from another principal saying that staff shortages allied with overwhelmed and morale sapping term has left school leaders bewildered and overwhelmed with a lack of support and guidance. That's how school principals, school leaders are feeling on the ground, Minister. You have to accept that. That's a very worrying picture.
Look, I absolutely appreciate that they are absolutely exhausted. This has been an incredibly difficult period for them, and I think that we can all recognise that. You will know and you will appreciate that we're not as prescriptive in our guidance in August, and that was as a response to teachers and head teachers who felt that they knew their schools best, and we were allowing them the flexibility in order to apply the mitigations. So we have worked and we've responded to practitioners, and I suppose I am concerned that there is that perception that they feel that they are in the dark, because certainly the department along with EA and ETI are there to support as we've gone through this whole process. And you'll be aware that the department holds regular meetings with the unions and practitioners in developing guidance and advice.
Minister, back to the Finance Minister's proposed 2% cut to education. I'm really, really worried about this, and I think it was touched on. Does that mean the emotional health and wellbeing framework is out the window? We're talking about opening the windows for keeping the classroom safe, so we're keeping the windows open to throw out the emotional health and wellbeing framework. We're keeping the windows open to throw out the First Start, or we're keeping the windows open to throw out programs that impact the most vulnerable in our education. Give me some comfort that the children who need the help the most are not forgotten about now as a consequence of the Finance Minister's proposed cuts to education.
Look, as I've said to your colleague, I am really, really concerned about this, and the impact that this will have on our most vulnerable. You'll appreciate that the vast majority of the budget goes on staff costs, and really anything additional to that becomes vulnerable, and it would be certainly would not be my intention to stand over cuts to those who are the most vulnerable. That has been sort of what we've said throughout this presentation. It's about protecting those young people who are vulnerable, but certainly Fair Start and obviously emotional health and wellbeing framework, all of those things are things which I'm committed to, and I hope that other members of the executive will also be.
Minister, in relation to staffing challenges that we currently face in education, given where we're at with the pandemic, how can it be even conceivable for a second to consider taking a special teacher away from a school because she has relatives at that school?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
How can it be conceivable to entertain the possibility of removing a special teacher from a school because that teacher has a relative at the school?
Okay, if I'm not actually aware of that being an issue.
That's an issue, Minister.
If there's a particular issue with regards to that, if you want to write to me, and I'll certainly come
I have
back
written to you,
you.
Minister. I'm just bewildered by that possibility, given where we're at with the pandemic.
Okay, well,
right now.
If you're content, maybe I could bring Ricky in on that particular item if he has any information with regards to that.
I think Minister will need to come back to the member on that point.
Okay.
I don't have any additional information at this stage.
Okay, Justin.
Finally, Minister, I'd like you and some of the members were discussing, people on your panel, and there's unbelievable expertise on your panel and people who've made major commitments to try and resolve the challenges we face. I want us to recognise what principals, staff and school teachers have been through and teaching assistants have been through this last 2 years almost. Recognise that and give them a really, really warm sense of gratitude for what they've been through and what they're continuing to go through, Minister.
Thanks, Justin.
Okay, sorry.
So
Obviously,
I'm asking you, Minister, to reach out and say what you feel they've given to us as a society over the last 2 years, because they've been disrupted more so than any other profession, probably.
Okay, absolutely, and you'll know I've written to principals this morning, obviously in advance of them going off on their Christmas leave, just to give recognition to the commitment and the dedication that they have shown over the last 21 months. But particularly, it's been very challenging for them, and I absolutely appreciate that from September. And obviously, mindful of that there may be some challenges ahead in January. So I have written to every principal this morning to state that.
Okay, thanks, Justin. I need to move on to Harry. Okay, thank you. Last member, Minister Harry Harvey, MLA, please. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister. First of all, can I express appreciation to the Minister for her commitment to keeping schools open with the ever-increasing challenges that this past times have brought, and now to cap it all with a 2% cut. I must say, Minister, that any schools and principals that I have visited lately, can I just tell you, are encouraged with your leadership. And Minister, just a wee question, I've just been thinking, will any of the things we've been through lately, will any of this affect your commitment to flexible school starting age? And do you still consider that this will be achievable within the next 3 months? Thank you.
I think the member for his question, and certainly that was one of the aspects that I'd hoped to raise this at the end of my opening remarks, and I am committed to greater flexibility for the starting age, and members will be aware of that from I started in this role. I've been committed to that, and you'll be aware then of the consultation that's currently out. I would hope to be in a position, although it very much depends on the responses, although I'm aware that there are 400 responses to date. So I'm not going to say too much just with regards to, I don't want it to seem like there's a fait accompli with regards to this, but I would be hopeful that dependent on the responses that I will be in a position to come to the committee early in the new year and ask for their views on perhaps moving towards accelerated passage to bring forward any legislation, but obviously that'll be very much dependent on the outworkings of the consultation, which officials, as I understand, are working on as they come in. So I mean, I have put a considerable amount of pressure on the team in order to deliver this, because I know this is something which the committee is also very much committed to.
Yep. Yes, Minister, it is. It's something that we very much welcome. It's great to have a good news story to work on. Appreciate that. And Minister, what other concerns would you have for the 2% cut in the budget?
I think really just to reflect on what we've said earlier, the impact that this will have on the day-to-day running of schools, and obviously any of the other projects and programmes which we have in place in order to support young people. As you'll be aware, there's also an independent review of education which is ongoing at this particular time. It will be due to report during this budget period of the next 3 years, and I would be concerned that the recommendations that they bring forward may then not be able to be funded either. So I mean, there is a very real concern as to the impacts that this is going to have, and I haven't hidden from that, and certainly in any questions or discussions that I've had even with principals, I've been very upfront with regards to the pressures that are likely to come as a consequence of this budget.
Yep. And when you mention the independent review panel, Minister, I take it they will also look at staff shortages?
That's not something that they necessarily will look at, particularly with regards to the COVID issue, but certainly everything within education looks to be within the terms of reference. So there'll be quite a considerable amount of work done on workforce planning as we move forward on this.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister, and your team, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Harry. Minister, I'll finish in 30 seconds. I know you need to get away. I just want to finish by reading a letter that I think the committee has received, and I think ministers have received in bullet point format for you here. It reads, "Dear Mr. Little, I'm 16. It was my 3rd day of AS levels. I had mild COVID-19 symptoms. It is now 3 months since. The headaches have never gone away. I got A grades in GCSE English. Now I can't read and find it hard to write. My muscles ache. I find it hard to sleep. When I walk upstairs, my chest hurts. I used to be a championship dancer, and now it hurts to walk a hill. There are 3 things I can taste: strawberries, salt and vinegar crisps, and one kind of juice from Lidl. I take antidepressants. I'm not alone. Lots of children have long COVID. There is no treatment. So I have 3 questions. Why don't all children wear masks in schools? Why can't all children get vaccinated? And when will schools be fitted with CO2 monitors and ventilation devices? Children and young people across Northern Ireland need your help." I think that's a really powerful reminder of how important it is that we maximise the safety of our children and young people in schools, Minister. And I think it's really important that in balancing maximum attendance, we have those effective mitigations and contingency plans in place as well. And I felt like I owed it to that young person to make sure that voice got heard today. Conscious your time is up, Minister. We're really grateful for it today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members, can I ask broadcasting to remove our witnesses and bring broadcasting bring members back into the spotlight, and ask the clerk for any actions from the meeting today? Thank you.
Members, a lot of issues were covered there with the Minister, starting off with the indoor events risk assessments that the unions brought to the fore last week, and the committee has already asked for clearer guidance on that. The fact that no other jurisdiction is having budget cuts of the nature being applied to education here was highlighted. And the members, we will have a budget update early next year. The department makes its January monitoring round updates on the 4th of January, and the committee will be provided with that information within 7 days. So we'll start to look at that again once we hit 2022. Childcare, the extension of the indemnity fund was clarified there. Members asked about SEN provision, workforce planning because of the staffing shortages in the review, and then the letter that the chair read from just now. We'll send that to the minister if we haven't already done that this week, actually. But I'm happy to take other actions that you may suggest.
Chair.
Daniel, and then Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Clerk, as well. Chair, I don't know how to quite put this into words, but this cut is extremely concerning. If we have all these expectations of ensuring that our children are protected and that our school staff are protected, how can all of these things done when we don't know where the light is at the end of the tunnel in relation to this pandemic, and we're seeing these cuts come in? The clerk has rightly pointed out there is no example in any other jurisdiction of such a cut. And, I really get more concerned, actually, when a finance minister is coming out with a statement like, let's put a 2% cut across all departments with the exception of health for obvious reasons in terms of health. But are we seriously putting children on the same level? Are we putting pupils on the same level as the pigs in the department for DAERA? Is that what really is happening? A 2% cut to education and a 2% cut to DAERA and a 2% cut to the other departments. Why is there no prioritisation given to the education of our children? The department has suffered serious cuts. Every single person that we would take evidence from would say that education in Northern Ireland, children's education in Northern Ireland is underfunded massively. We're already been told about nearly a 600 million shortfall that already exists. That doesn't include the 2% further cut, plus inflation on top of that. Like, how on earth, I just have no words for this. Either the Minister for Finance doesn't get it, or the Minister for Education isn't explaining it. But one thing for certain, it's very clear. There is no prioritisation given to the education of our children in Northern Ireland by the Minister at the Executive, be it Finance or Education. And we need to be shouting and screaming about this, because the impact of this is going to be so severe, and particularly on those children from more deprived backgrounds across Northern Ireland, because the cuts hit their hardest. We need to protect our children, Chair. I just find this, the more I look at these figures, I find this mind-boggling. I just can't get my head around how Finance can say 2% of children's education at the same time as DAERA. It doesn't make no sense. I just can't get my head around it.
Okay. I'd like I'll translate your shouting into advocacy. I'd like our advocacy to be effective. And I know we'd mentioned previously considering an urgent Assembly motion if Assembly business allows. I'm happy to liaise with you in relation to that offline, Daniel. Obviously, the Assembly is in recess, but I'm happy to consider our options to raise alarm in relation to that proposed cut, and perhaps an Assembly motion from the Education Committee might be an effective way to do that. But happy to discuss how best we can raise an alarm in relation to that with you. Nicola, you wanted to come in as well? And then Diane, happy to come in after.
Thanks, Chair. It was just about the action points, Evelyn, that you had made there. Could we also include a question? The Minister did say she would get back to me on it about the temporary closure support fund for childcare settings, to see if it will be extended into next year as well, but also about the sustainability fund, which hadn't been extended previously. From October to December. So if we could just get some clarity as to why it wasn't extended, or if there'll be any kind of changes to that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. Thanks, Clark. Diane?
Yes, thank you. No, just to really reiterate the point that Daniel made around funding. It is my understanding, and that there is a £350 million gap in the budget for next year, and that is just for core business. That is then will be compounded by an additional 2% cut across the board that the Finance Minister wants for all departments, bar health, to sustain. As we know, no other part of the United Kingdom has as low a funding per pupil as Northern Ireland. And if we are to protect our children and to grow our education base, and actually then to grow skills in the economy, we have to do something about it. But I'm also particularly worried, and Aoibhinn, I'm forgive me if I have missed this in your list of action points. I'm also particularly worried. I have visited a number of schools in my constituency where many of the head teachers talk to me about their concerns over pupil safety and those children who are deemed as vulnerable. And we've heard some very harrowing, high-profile cases in the media recently. And I would like us to ask, is there a protocol for dealing with children who are deemed as vulnerable and perhaps unsafe? And how are education and schools working with health and social services to make sure children are safe?
Okay. Justin, then, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah. Just can we seek clarity on that point I raised the Minister in terms of special teachers being allowed to teach in schools where they've got relatives?
Thanks, Justin.
Happy to do that, yeah. Any other members want to come in? No? Okay. So we can consider the actions that we take in relation to the cut. I'm very grateful for everybody's attendance today. I realise it is a constituency day, but this was the date that was offered to us by the Minister. That's why it required many of us to reschedule commitments in order to make it. The Education Minister and the CMO came to the committee on the 22nd of September, and they made a strong case that the changes to COVID safety and policies in schools were about increasing and maximising attendance. And the Minister has said there are a number of reasons as to why attendance is slightly lower this term than this time last year. But it's unavoidable that one of the key aims of that policy to increase attendance has not happened. The information being provided in relation to how many air quality devices are in schools as we speak now is really concerning, and the lack of additional teachers being redeployed onto the NISTR register is really concerning as well. Obviously, we're going into the Christmas break, and the extent of the advice that schools appear to be receiving for returning in January, as of the Friday the 17th of December, is take a lateral flow test 24 hours before you return. We've done all we can today, members, to ask reasonable questions with regards how those obvious mitigation measures are going to be accelerated, what contingencies are in place if a school is just physically can't facilitate a class. But I think we still need more robust answers to those questions, and we'll keep doing our best to get them on behalf of children and young people for whom the impact of COVID can be more significant than others at times, as I read, and to address that staff shortage in schools, which was cited by every teaching union that we met with. So there are, in addition to our serious concern for budgetary cut proposals, there are real urgent issues facing schools that we'll continue to do our best to raise as an education committee. Can I close by echoing the recognition that has been given today to all educational staff, all children and young people, all families that are doing their absolute best to maintain the education of our children and young people in our schools in incredibly difficult circumstances. We applaud them, we thank them, and we will keep doing everything we can to ensure they have the resources that they need to be the best that they can be. Members, this is our last meeting, finally, prior to Christmas. Can I give you guys a really sincere happy Christmas, restful Christmas, and then we will return, obviously, ready to do our best on all of these issues that face education at this time. Our next meeting is clerk scheduled for the new year. Can you confirm the day for us at this stage, or will you write to members to confirm?
I can write to members to confirm, Chair. There is one agenda item scheduled for the 5th of January, but members haven't all got back to me about their availability for that. I also did a recce at the Forest School site at Clandeboy, and they're available to come and talk to the committee on the 11th in an informal setting, and that would line up then for a PE briefing from the department on the 12th. So I'll confirm whether we're starting back on the 5th or the 11th.
Okay. Any other business, members, before I close? No.
Just very briefly, Chair, I just think I completely agree with everything you've said there, and thank the clerk in particular and the staff of the committee and everyone who has engaged and helped and assisted us, research teams and everyone else over the last number of months. Everyone deserves a well-earned break over Christmas, and indeed this wider committee, because we've all been working hard to get through the various issues that have been faced with us. I just want to make a final suggestion, if we could get some agreement. I think we've raised this previously, but I was just trying to remind myself whether we have or not. Is it possible to ask for the Finance Minister to come before the committee, given the pressures that exist financially?
Sure, we can ask. Don't know what response we'll receive, but yeah, happy to ask. We asked another minister previously, and they didn't attend, but we can try. Yeah. Okay. Stay safe, folks, and again, as Daniel said, a huge thanks to the clerking team that make this committee possible as well. Special Christmas for you guys. Stay safe, everyone, and see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Happy Christmas, everyone.
Happy Christmas, everybody. All the best. Evan deserves a medal.